Good evening, good people of Semester at Sea. My name is Lisa Slavid, and I'm an alumni of Semester at Sea. I've gotten to sail 4 times, starting in spring 1998. Also summer 2007 with Dr. Tania Israel, who I'm interviewing today, and again in fall 12 and fall 17. I'm also currently serving as the vice chair of the Board of Trustees, and I'm really excited to have Tania Israel as a guest on the Wavelengths series. This is a series that Semester at Sea started just to kind of connect people during the pandemic, but then also when we realized how many amazing alumni we have, we just kept running with it to showcase folks' talents and projects and skills. And we're lucky to have Dr. Tania Israel today with us. She's a professor of psychology at UC Santa Barbara, and she teaches graduate students there. She also has written a book called Beyond Your Bubble, which we're going to get to in a bit. And she's fresh off interviews yesterday with NPR and the Today Show. So we're excited to have her today with us. And we wanted to talk first, though, before launching into book things, a little bit about Semester at Sea and your connection to Semester at Sea, and then just say hi. So hi, Tania. Also shout out to our summer 2007 sailees with us, our shippies who came with us too. I know some are watching along. So hi, Tania, how are you today?
Hi, Lisa. I'm fine. I am delighted to be here. I'm excited to get to talk with Semester at Sea alumni. I'm excited to get to have a conversation with you. I'm excited to talk about dialogue across the political divide. So all of that is really awesome. Yeah. So I will say I'm a professor in the Department of Counseling, Clinical, and School Psychology at UCSB, and I teach undergrads and grad students, and I do research on LGBTQ issues. And then I wrote this book, Beyond Your Bubble, about how to have dialogue across the political divide. So I know that y'all will have a chance to ask questions. So that's sort of my realm of expertise if you've got anything you want to know about any of that.
Great. Great. Thanks, Tania. And then also, I know one of the questions that we had to start off with was how did you find out about Semester at Sea? And so Tania and I talked about this, and we sailed together as partners back then. We're still good friends, so I hope that speaks to our shared emotional intelligence. But Tania, can you share a little bit with us about your voyage? Any highlights or any wisdom you gained from that?
Oh my gosh, so much. So first of all, thank you, Lisa, for introducing me to Semester at Sea. Thank you for bringing me along on your voyage. I was a part-time, I was the spirituality coordinator, which was such a great position. I gained so much from it and brought a little bit to it. And, but just the opportunity to be on that voyage. We went to 8 different countries in Latin America that summer. And so something I loved the open mic when we were leaving each port, because then you'd get to hear about everybody's experiences. Because, you know, like we would each just get to do the thing that we were doing, but then everybody else was spread across the country doing all kinds of other things. So then I started like talking to people about their experiences, like, what did you do? And what did you do? And what did you see? And then because I have a quirky muse, I would end up writing a song to try to encapsulate everybody's experience in each of the countries. And so that was one of my favorite things, was just to try to hear from everybody what they were up to and then bring it together in a song. And one of my favorite moments of that was when Mario and I were singing a song about Ecuador, and then Doug was acting it out, and I think Doug's interpretation of blue-footed boobies was really one of my highlights of the entire voyage. So anyway, that was great. And also I just love all the crew and hanging out in the dining room and just hanging out with them and hanging out with everybody who would come by. So, oh my gosh, what a highlight Semester at Sea was. I know you all know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. You were talking to me earlier too a little bit about curiosity and how Semester at Sea was sparked curiosity.
Oh yeah, so this was, you know, when I think about like Semester at Sea in the context of the work that I'm doing now about dialogue across political lines, I think one of the things I really appreciate was that we were in it was a community of learners, floating around in the sea, and everybody was wanting to learn. And then we'd get to a country and everyone would like get off the ship, like wanting to learn things. And sometimes what we experienced would kind of rub up against us in a way. It wasn't always smooth. Sometimes things were difficult, or there would be, cultural things that would make us uncomfortable, or we'd encounter people who were suffering in different ways or who had really different worldviews than we had. And that we took that as learning experiences. And we got back on the ship and we tried to integrate all of that knowledge and understand it better. And that's really something that I think is an inspiring image as we think about how to deal with these difficult times in terms of conflict in our country and in the world. Because basically, let's think about the United States as being a big ship, and we're all on this ship and we're a community of learners, and we're rubbing up against experiences that are not comfortable for us and trying to figure out what to do with them. And gosh, can we all on this ship help each other learn and embrace those as growth experiences like we did when we were on semester at sea?
Yeah. Thank you. Let's shift a little bit to the book then, and about, can you share with us what inspired you to write this book and how it all started?
Sure. So, when the 2016 election happened, I think it was clear to everyone that we were having some struggles in our country and that there were some divisions. But it was also, I'm a psychologist, and I was looking at the literature on this, and I knew that it was not only, a struggle that people were experiencing about politics, but it was really affecting our relationships with family members and friends, and within our communities, and that it's also been affecting our health. Like, people's stress around politics is really heightened over the last several years. And I am a psychologist. I've been teaching healing skills for decades. I've also, partially because I do stuff on LGBTQ issues, I've been engaged in difficult dialogues around things like religion and sexual orientation and law enforcement and abortion. Like, I've done all of these different things. And so I've had experiences where I've actually gotten to talk to and listen to and learn from people who have really different views than I have. And so I was like, maybe I can do something helpful here. Maybe there's something I have to offer. And so I started out, again, I have a quirky muse. So I started out by creating a resource that I'll share with you now. I want to show you all what I made. And it's a resource that I call the flow chart that will resolve all political conflict in our country, because I am optimistic like that. But I really wanted to help people think about how to be intentional about their conversations that they were having. Like, do you actually want to have a conversation with somebody who's got a different view? And if you do, what are you trying to get out of it? Are you just trying to vent, or do you actually want to have a different kind of conversation where you can maybe connect? And so this sort of walks people through like how to do that and what are the different skills you need and all of that. So I put this together. And by the way, if you like this, you can get it on my website, which is taniaisrael.com, and you can download it. Or actually, if you're really worried about what's coming up for the holidays, you can actually get a version that's on a placemat for Thanksgiving. It's a Thanksgiving themed placemat. I want to thank the cartoonist Lisa Slavid, who made the Thanksgiving decorations for that. So Lisa and I have great collaborations. So anyway, so that's the flow chart that will resolve all political conflict in our country. Spoiler alert, it did not actually resolve all political conflict in our country. So then I was like, all right, I guess I need to do something more. So then I created a workshop because I thought maybe people actually need to develop the skills. So I created a 2-hour skills building workshop that a couple hundred people went through, and that was great, but people still wanted more resources. So I was like, all right, I guess I got to write a book. So I wrote a book. I thought I should, hang on. it looks like this. I wrote a book. All right, Lisa's got it too. So Beyond Your Bubble. And it came out in August. And it turns out that was good timing because people are really struggling right now with how to have these conversations. It feels, the thing that feels best, honestly, is to have something that might be helpful to offer people in this time of just tremendous challenge and struggle.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. It makes me think too a little bit about, this doesn't all have to be about semester at sea, but I'm thinking about what you said about semester at sea and how I know that when we sailed in 2007, bandwidth was like this. In 98, there was no internet on board, but it makes me think about the bubble of the ship when we didn't have access to all email and news sources just constantly bombarding us. And so we were more likely to have conversations across viewpoints or just learn from each other and listen to one another. There's a lot more human interaction in that community. And I think even with internet on board right now, I think that continues to this day, where you have those railing, watching the ocean go by conversations or, over a meal. So
I think that's a great point about, and I know that people are watching this on social media. So social media can be good, but it's also not been the best way for us to try to communicate about really difficult stuff. I know people feel like they're having conversations because they're commenting on people's Facebook posts and stuff, but that's not really a conversation. Like, you all know what it's like to be part of an in-person community if you've been on semester at sea. And so I think that's something we can really strive for is, we need to have connection that's face-to-face, not Facebook to Facebook.
Ooh, I like that. I like that. When we were talking and prepping for this interview, you talked a little bit about intentionality and being intentional. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. When I did the workshop, I would always ask people, what brings you to this? Like, why are you interested in dialogue? And the most common answer that I got was, there's someone in my life who I want to maintain a good connection with, and we're struggling around this. And then there were, of course, people who also wanted to persuade other people or who wanted to find common ground and help heal the divide. And then there were a lot of people who said, I just can't understand why people think or act or vote as they do. And so I just want to try to comprehend what's going on here. And I think it's really important that we keep our motivations in mind, because sometimes that will help us to stay engaged in a conversation even when it's challenging. And so just remember why it is that you want to connect. And the other thing that I will tell you is that no matter which of those things motivates you to have dialogue, the thing that will best help you accomplish that goal is trying to promote understanding with that other person. Trying to understand them better is going to be better than trying to push your views on the other person. And so whether you want to maintain the connection or persuade or find common ground, or you just can't understand them, try to understand. That's the key.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I want to ask you some questions around listening and some of your advice for listening. But can I ask you a question before we even get there? Because a common thing that I'm starting to see happen right now is people saying, I don't want to listen anymore if the other side is dehumanizing me. And so can you speak to that a little bit before we get into listening tips? Because my fear is people are just like, no, I'm done listening. So.
Okay. So why should you listen? Like if you feel like these other people are dehumanizing you or dehumanizing other people who you care a lot about, why would you want to listen to them? So the first thing that I guess what I want to talk about then is our perceptions that we have of people who are on what we perceive to be the other side. So there's actually decades of research that tells us that our perceptions of people on the other side are actually kind of distorted. We tend to see Well, first of all, there's just this thing where we tend to see ourselves as being logical and having really well-founded ideas. And we tend to see other people, even people who agree with us, and definitely people who don't agree with us, we see as being sort of irrational, making more like emotional decisions, and even seeing other people as unkind. It turns out this is a basic human error that we all make. And so we're all doing this all the time. That's the bad news. The good news is if we know this, we can correct for it. Mm-hmm. And so the way to correct for it is actually to try to understand somebody, to listen to them, to stop flattening them out into this stereotype of who you think they are, mm-hmm. and find out who they really are. And it's even more so when we get partisan about it. Like there's a lot of stuff that shows us that Republicans and Democrats, when we estimate where everybody is, we're actually so much closer together than we estimate each other to be. And so like bridging that divide, the divide is not as wide as we think. And so where we're thinking, oh, that person's dehumanizing me because they're saying all lives matter, and don't they see that that's invalidating the idea that Black lives matter? Well, one of the things we can do is say, tell me what you mean by that, rather than reacting back to it, because it'll be interesting to find out more about what that means to them. And sometimes the meaning behind things, they mean the same things we mean when we're saying Black lives matter. Like sometimes there's a connect there in the underlying values even.
Yeah. When I'm hearing you say that too, I'm also just getting a sense of kind of the pain that people are carrying around too, and the pain of not being heard in some ways. So let's talk about listening and holding space and asking curious questions. What are a couple listening lessons or points you'd like to share with us?
So when we listen, there are ways that we can listen that are going to, again, like help us to accomplish our goals. And we talk about active listening in my field, and there's a couple things about that, a couple skills. One is giving people an uninterrupted time to speak. And the way I always remember that, if you're like, how am I going to remember just to stay quiet? So the thing I will tell you is that if you rearrange the letters of the word listen, it makes the word silent. And it took me like 20 years of being a psychologist before I figured that out. So it's important that we actually give people time to speak. And it's such a gift that we often don't give other people, is just giving them that time to be able to say their piece. And then after they say their piece, what we often want to do is just come back with, well, I think this instead. It turns out that what's more helpful than that is if we come back and we say, this is what I hear you saying. And we actually summarize back to them what we just heard them say. And that does a couple of things. Like one, it makes sure that we actually got it, like that we actually understood what they were saying. And the other thing that it does is it helps them to feel understood. And that is just so healing in itself, that feeling understood. So both of those things are great. And then when we do ask questions, I would say we want to ask them in the spirit of encouraging someone to elaborate, and not in the spirit of like, well, don't you think this? Because that's not really a question. So asking open-ended questions, it can't just be answered with a yes or a no, but asking them in a true spirit of encouragement and really wanting to draw someone out. And I'll say one more thing about listening, which is that all of those are skills, but there's also an attitude going into this that I think is helpful. And that is curiosity. I think going into these conversations, genuinely wanting to understand where somebody else is coming from is probably even more important than the specific skills themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. I also was wondering too, I think you speak to this in your book, about when you're, the stakes are high, these are conversations where there's high emotions. So how do you take care of yourself in that when there's high emotions?
Really? Do people sometimes get their buttons pushed when we're talking about politics? I know this is so difficult. People are really struggling with this because it's not only the conversations themselves, but even just imagining having the conversations, can make people's like blood pressure go up and that people's hearts are beating faster and they're feeling flushed. And so the first thing is to just notice that, like notice what's going on for you physically, because honestly, our bodies are built to respond to threat as if that threat is a saber-toothed tiger, because that's how our bodies were built and when our bodies were built. And so we respond to every threat that way. And it turns out that when you're having dialogue across political lines, very likely the greatest threat you're experiencing is that someone is going to speak to you in a harsh tone and they're going to disagree with you. And you can actually survive that. So that's the first thing to know. I mean, obviously, if it's an actually dangerous situation, get out of that, like don't try to handle it. But otherwise, if it's just like, okay, they're speaking loudly and harshly and disagreeing with what I'm saying, the things that you can do then, once you have that perspective, okay, I want to stay in this, then there are things that you can do to address those physiological things that are coming up for you. So try taking slow, deep breaths. The great news is we breathe all the time anyway. So there, Lisa's demonstrating that right now. She's taking a slow, deep breath, and you can just do that as somebody's yelling at you, and it will help you to stay grounded. The other thing you can do to ground yourself is just bringing attention to your feet on the floor and feeling your feet under you, feeling the chair under you, touching your own hand is something even that can just bring yourself back to kind of a grounded in-body situation. So we talk about the fight, flight, or freeze response to threat. And so these are things that can sort of get us out of that loop and help us to remain present and grounded and be able to have a conversation.
Thank you. Yeah. I also want to make sure that we open up the floor to questions. So if folks in our live audience have any questions, please put them in the comments and we'll get them. But I want to go into a couple more questions of my own, which is,
great.
What are some of the feedback or comments you've gotten from the book so far?
So people are telling me that they're finding the book helpful. And the interesting thing about it is that they're finding the book helpful even before they have a conversation. Just reading the book seems like it's helpful to people in terms of, okay, I can have these conversations. They can work out well, because honestly, what we're imagining in our heads is the stuff that we see on TV with people, arguing with each other in a heated way. And that's not dialogue. That's sometimes it's not even debate. It's more like diatribe, where they're just like, venting. And so giving people a sense, I created these fictional cousins in the book, Celine and Kevin, and Celine and Kevin demonstrate all these skills and show what productive dialogue can look like and connected dialogue can look like. And I'll get back to that in a minute. But so the book, yes. So people are saying it's helpful just to read the book. It's helping them to feel more confident that they can have these conversations. It's helping to reduce their stress just because they're not so worried about having these conversations and what that would be like. The other thing is that these skills are really practical and they're really learnable skills. Like, I'm a researcher, but this book does not read like a research study. It's short. See, it's not long. It doesn't take long to read this book. And so I think it just gives people tools. And when we have those kinds of tools, it's just easier to go out in the world with greater confidence.
Yeah.
There was something I was going to get back to also on that. Okay, but if we have a question, then let's take that and I'll remember what I was going to say.
We do. It was the imaginary cousins, but we can come back to that.
Oh, right.
So let's come back to that with a question, which is, what if one of the imaginary cousins has a conspiracy theory? So Mario asks, how do you deal with known conspiracy theory arguments? Any advice?
Wow. It's so hard when everybody's got a different understanding of what is true. And the thing that we really want to do is like help people to get to like, no, 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 that's not true. Like if you just knew that this was true instead, then everything would be cool. And so I want everyone to think about the things that you know to be true. And if somebody else says, oh, no, 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 those things aren't true. These things are true instead. Just believe these things and then everything's going to be fine. And you would be like, no, like actually arguing the facts with someone, it turns out that's not the best way to shift their view. And it's also not the best way to maintain that connection. And that connection is really important to be able to actually, you know, either change their view or heal that relationship or whatever. So what do? There's this really cool study that I won't go into the whole study right now, but the thing that I'll tell you about it is that they asked people, instead of saying, well, like prove why your point is right. Instead, you know, they said, okay, you know, what do you believe about these policies and things? And then they said, okay, explain to us how that would work. And so it's drawing someone out in terms of elaborating things. So first of all, it turns out most of us have no idea how anything actually works on that level of detail. So we are super confident that we understand things until someone says, oh, okay, I'd be really interested in knowing more about that. And then you're like, okay, well, I don't know, I kind of think this, but well, no, maybe it's this instead. Like we realize that we don't actually get it all on that level of detail. And so they call it, I love this term, the illusion of explanatory depth. Like we actually think we can explain stuff, but once somebody, and you got to do it in a certain way, because you can't do it in a challenging way. You can't be like, well, how do you think that would work? Like, you've got to be like, oh, like, I'd really like to hear more about how that would work, or explain to me like how these things are connected. I don't understand. Then it will, first of all, I mean, maybe honestly, there's something that you didn't understand about it and they're going to help you to understand. But the other thing that it will do typically is help people who are more extreme to be less extreme. And it will also help people who think that they know something in great certainty. It'll make them a little bit more humble about their knowledge that they have. Speaking of humility, I remember what I wanted to say.
Okay, good.
So I was talking about curiosity and how it's important to go in with curiosity. And so there's this thing called intellectual humility. It's part of cultural humility. Intellectual humility really says we can hold very strong and even extreme values and opinions. And we don't have to compromise those views in order to be curious about and respectful of other people's views. And so really that curiosity and respect can be so helpful in terms of approaching these conversations with a more open attitude, and knowing that that doesn't mean that you're compromising anything about your own values. I like to think about this as being righteous without being self-righteous.
Mm-hmm. That makes me think about my time in higher education and working with students, and just giving them the space to grow and find their truth, speak their truth, hear different aspects. And even if I disagreed with them, I found the best way to let them go deeper was to just ask questions. I think that's one of the things I loved about Semester at Sea, is so many things like that graph of things we know and things we know we don't know, and then things we don't know, and just to have the curiosity in that. Absolutely. One of the things I appreciate about interviewing you, and there's a lot, but it's just cool. It's cool that you do research on listening and helping and healing. It's cool that you wrote a book, and it's also cool that you can refer to so many other scientific studies. So sometimes I think a lot of this can come off as, you know, either pop culture wisdom or true wisdom. I think there's a lot of wisdom offerings out there. And when you have a wisdom offering, sometimes you know what's wise, but how do you do it? And I think in the book you break down some steps of how to do it. And I also love that you just bust out studies on what people spend time scientifically exploring some of these things too. So Yeah.
One more thing that I always appreciate is bringing art into things, and so one of the things that I talk about in the book is perspective taking, and how, you know, from a different perspective, things might look entirely, you know, like a different story than what we have. And so in the book, I did that by sharing, and I'll share my screen again.
Cool.
A drawing that was done by our very own Lisa Slavid, creator of P Doodles cartoons. Okay, so you're not going to do it, so I'm going to do this, Lisa. So, okay, first of all, this is all about perspective taking. So you can see it's like from this side, this looks like 3 planks, and from this side, this looks like 2 planks. I do not know how to draw optical illusions, but Lisa's able to do that because she's also a cartoonist. And if you're not familiar with P Doodles, you have to follow on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, on all the platforms.
Oh, thanks.
Oh my gosh, because there are these cute little like vegetables and things, and they're always charming and witty and joyful. And so I love this because one of the things that I think is hard to keep in mind is that we can bring warmth into even the most challenging kinds of topics. And I think that, Lisa, you do that so well. And so thank you for drawing this for my book, because I think that this is an awesome representation of exactly this thing we're talking about.
Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, I think a lot of that is happening too. So how do we, I'm really interested in truth and being curious and getting good information so that we can build a thriving community together, and what that looks like. And I know that looks different in different places in lots of different ways. So we have another question coming through. Garrett asks, hi Garrett, how does this translate into productive public forums and conversations? A concern about highlighting opposing views publicly right now for students or others on one side could cause a lot of pain to somebody else who's experiencing it as harm. And so he wants the learning to happen, but without the harm. So public forums, conversations.
This is so challenging. And those of you who are higher education administrators or in leadership positions in business or community, like you are trying to do this, you know, beyond one-on-one conversations that people are having. And how do we do this when we're bringing lots of people together? And sometimes someone sharing their own perspective is so, you know, can represent other people in ways that are really painful and hurtful. So there's a couple things that I think about it. I think, first of all, where we can do things in smaller dyad kinds of things and really get to know people and develop those relationships. Honestly, I'm just going to say the entire thing is all about relationships. And so now I'm going to quote you, Lisa. I know that this wasn't yours originally and you were quoting, but you're the person I've heard it from most and most often. Lisa always says, with relationship comes grace. The stronger a bond you have with somebody, the more forgiving you can be. And I think that is honestly, really, you could, I shouldn't say this, my publisher's going to kill me. You just throw away the book. And it's really all about relationships. It's all about connecting with other people, because when you have that, then you're able to do more of that hard work and exploration. Okay, so that's one piece of it. The other piece that I'm going to say is that we want to try to have these conversations across a difference, and especially in those situations where, you know, some people are experiencing more privilege on a characteristic and other people are, you know, maybe experiencing more oppression on a characteristic. And the people who are experiencing privilege sometimes will say things, and the people experiencing oppression are like, oh my gosh, I am feeling that oppression based on what you were saying. You know, we really get into challenging situations with that. But how are people supposed to learn otherwise if we're not able to explore and talk about this. So there's a couple of things. I mean, one, we can divide people up in different ways. And we do that sometimes where we've got these groups where, you know, people are doing different kinds of work based on some different characteristics they might have. And sometimes that's helpful, but we can't always do that. And we don't always want to do that. We at some point might want to bring people together more. And by the way, I should just be letting Lisa answer this question because she is much more of an expert on diversity training even than I am. So I'm going to let you answer it after I'm done answering it. You can tell me how I did. The other thing about it is to keep in mind that even if we're experiencing oppression on things, that we can also be resilient at times. And I know that it's exhausting to be resilient all the time. I mean, I've got a lot of different target identities. You know, I describe myself as a biracial, Asian American, bisexual, Jewish, Buddhist, feminist. But, you know, so yeah, I got a lot of target stuff, but I also am a relatively light-skinned, cisgender, you know, born in the US as a citizen, you know, like there's all these different things. I'm currently able-bodied, was raised with economic privilege. Like there's all kinds of things about myself that aren't that. And so the first thing I'll say is I'm a mix of things. And most of us are a mix of things. So what I always try to do, sometimes we can hear something and go immediately to that most vulnerable part of ourselves. And that's really appropriate for us to notice that and to have spaces where we can feel and experience that. We can also, like, depending on the situation, we might be like, that's the only place I can be in right now because of what's going on. So I just need to go and talk to my people who can just be supportive. And that's totally legit. I think we can also say, okay, are there times when I can be like, okay, I get that. That is painful. And I've been experiencing that a lot in my life. And I've also got some other resources that I feel like I can draw on right now, either from my own perspective or as an ally to another group. And right now, I'm going to try to work from that perspective and work to, you know, help somebody else understand something that they don't understand and try to stay in it. So I would say it's super complicated. I don't think that there's a one right answer, but those are some of the perspectives that I bring to it. But Lisa, what would you say about that?
Well, I would say that you did a great job with that. And I would actually say the wisdom is in the question. I don't have an answer either. And I don't know. I think there's some things on how we run public forums. I'm thinking of like town halls where people speak up, where we're not operating with a set of ground rules. We might think we're operating from a set of civility rules, but who knows where, like they're not spelled out. And so I don't know. I think Garrett's question is, you know, how does this translate into productive public conversations and forums? And I think that would probably be a question for every participant of those conversations for them to think about. And to think about going back to what you said, Tania, which is, what do you want out of this? You know, are you here to grandstand, and are you here to try to move an issue forward or thrive, like help a community thrive? So
yeah,
I think
and learn.
I'm a big fan of just the wisdom of the question, even if we don't have the answers, that moving into those conversations with that question in mind will help us do better, is kind of my philosophy with that.
And I guess one of the things I'll say about that also is, and this isn't actually answering this question, but when we think about sort of the public face of all of this, like the work that I do is a lot about what we do outside of those public spaces. And if we're not doing that work outside of the public spaces, what we're doing in the public spaces is so much more difficult. But if you've actually sat down and had a conversation with someone who's got a really different view and come to understand them better, then when you hear somebody making a public comment, it may strike you differently than it would if the only thing that you get is just that little slice that you're getting from that public comment. So I think that work that we do more in relationship and in dialogue can really help us carry that over into those more public spaces.
Okay, cool. We have another question coming in that I'd like to share, and my apologies. Sanja Moon Daniels asks, how can I help to diffuse someone who is unhappy with my political choices? What are some ways to help those that feel differently than I do to feel at ease with opposing political sides?
Yeah. So what if sort of someone's coming to you like, I can't believe that you're thinking or acting or voting as you are, and that, I'm really unhappy with that. So I would say, all right, well, what if we go back to those skills? Like, first of all, it might kind of push your buttons. So you might need to take a deep breath and decide if you like, what are your motivations for staying in this conversation? So if it's an opportunity to understand or maintain a connection, then you might say, tell me more about why this upsets you. Like what's challenging for you about what I'm doing, and try to and listen to them and see what they have to say and where they're coming from, and try to understand them more. The other thing is that once you've done that for them, then they're more likely to be interested in what you have to say also.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Great. Thank you for the questions. I have a question for you, Tania, about sort of moving into the wrapping up phase, but talking a little bit about if there's a key insight you want folks to take away from the message of Beyond Your Bubble, or a key question you want people to be asking themselves, what might that be?
So when I think about what's important to take away from this, like I said, the relationship piece is really important. The other thing that I think about is, and this has to do with relationship, I think about integrity. And integrity has a number of different meanings, but really it means wholeness. It means to be whole. And I think about that in terms of for ourselves, like how can we each maintain our integrity? And some of the way we can do that is to, like I talked about, being righteous without being self-righteous. We can hold on to our views and still be respectful of and interested in other people. And so that's an important part of wholeness. But there's another part, which is wholeness as a family, as a community, as a society. And how do we maintain that wholeness when there's so much difference within that? And I really think that curiosity, that respectfulness, that these skills can help with, that's really key. Because I was thinking about the name of our country, the United States of America. And so there's this united part, but then there's all these different states. There's all these different entities within that have different interests based on their geography and their weather and their agriculture and their business and different values that are related to those things very often. But it's united. And I thought, well, we're sort of like that. Like we're this country made up of people who have so many different views and values. And that's actually the strength of this. And so bringing all of that together, bringing our difference together, I think is the way of making us stronger as like each of us individually, but also as part of our society.
Which is a really sweet segue into another question I'd asked you earlier in prepping for this, which was about hope. And you wanted to share a little bit about the why of the book for you, and how that connects to hope.
Yeah. So the thing that's interesting is I've been in this work, and the more I'm reading about the political divide and the more I'm doing this work, weirdly, the more optimistic I am that we can bridge this divide. Again, there's a lot of research that says there's reasons for this divide, but then there's a lot that we can do to correct for that once we know about it. And I'm also seeing, I'm not the only one doing this. Like, I didn't just write a book and that's the only thing out there. There's all of these different organizations that are bringing people together because people want to come together across the divide. There's also research showing that really most people aren't at the extremes. Most people are in what they're calling the exhausted majority, which are the people who are in the middle, who are just tired of the tone of the arguments by the extremes. And the saddest thing to me about that is that people are checking out of our democracy, that they're disengaging. So I think it's really important to maintain hope and to know that we can all make a difference in this. And yeah, and to keep that optimism and use that to motivate us to actually take some action that feels positive and connected with other folks.
Thank you. Makes me think of the Archbishop Desmond Tutu talking about being a prisoner of hope, but I appreciate that. And I appreciate you sharing your learnings with us that actually help us be lifelong learners. I think that that's a part, listening is a lifelong learning skill. And I know our Semester at Sea community values that. We value exploring. And so thank you for giving us a tool to do that and for your time today. Yeah, anything else you want to say before I start wrapping up on this?
Just one thing I want to tell you all a story, which is that so I was on the Today Show yesterday, which was an exciting opportunity and also rather stressful. But I was curating my bookshelf to make a good background for the interview, and I found this, like, there was some bookmark sticking out of a book, and so I was trying to tidy things up. So I pulled the bookmark out, and it turns out it's a Semester at Sea luggage tag. I just wanted to share that. Semester at Sea, it's it just pops up at those times when you need a little encouragement to get you through a challenging moment.
A little encouragement.
Encouragement.
I love, it's a great metaphor for how Semester at Sea continues to weave its way in our lives after we've been on the journey. So thank you so much for your time and your insights. I felt pretty timely suggesting to do a Wavelengths with you. And then, we didn't get the beat on the Today Show or the NPR, but that's okay. They got to ask you good questions, follow up. So thank you for your time again. And thank you for everyone that tuned in or watches this later. We really appreciate you, really appreciate and love our Semester at Sea community. One of my roles as vice chair is to also make sure people know that this is an organization that's a nonprofit organization. And so if you are able to continue to do a monthly donation or a small donation or a large donation this semester, last week was Founders Week, but we really appreciate everyone who supports the program and supports students going and learning about the world. I think that's really what we do right now is really, really needed. And we just appreciate the contributions because that helps us with smooth sailing. So I want to thank folks for that. And then just remind people that this is a series that Semester at Sea we're doing weekly on Wednesday in the evenings between 4 and 6, depending upon our speakers' availabilities. And upcoming next, we have Louis Patler, who's a phenomenal guy. He's going to be talking about his drum collection, and he donated drums to Semester at Sea too, over 50 different types of drums. And this is one of the things I love about people like Louis and Tania is that you're all super creative in different ways on top of your normal day job. So Tanya's professor and wrote a book, and Louis is actually an award-winning Amazon and New York Times bestselling author on leadership, but he's going to talk about drums. I'm sure he'll weave a beat together of those. I do make puns occasionally. So that's our next speaker for the next round. And Tania, is just really an honor and a joy. And thank you for giving our time. I know you're in high demand, but we really appreciate you sharing this, this wisdom with us. And I'm going to just do a little Beyond Your Bubble piece again too. And also we had fun putting our sweatshirts up for the show. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Be well and take care. Good evening, good people.